From the founding of Khazad-dûm in the Elder Days to its fall in the Third Age, over 6,000 years of dwarven civilization rose and crumbled beneath the Misty Mountains. A kingdom that began with hope reflected in a mirror-still lake would end in fire and shadow. This is the story of how the greatest kingdom of the Dwarves rose to unmatched glory, only to fall into darkness and become Moria, the Black Pit, where even the bravest warriors feared to tread. In the deeps of the Misty Mountains, beneath three mighty peaks, the greatest kingdom of the dwarven race took shape. Durin the Deathless, first of the seven fathers of the Dwarves, awakened in Mount Gundabad far to the north. His steps led him south through the mountain range until he came to a still, dark lake nestled in a valley between three mountains. The waters mirrored the stars above with perfect clarity. In that reflection, a crown of stars appeared around his head, an omen that marked this place as his destined home. Durin stood transfixed by the vision, understanding that here lay the seat of power he had been created to build, a kingdom that would endure beyond the count of years. With this certainty driving him, Durin gathered the first of his people. Master miners and stonecrafters came at his call, drawn by tales of rich ore deposits and perfect stone. The founding of Khazad-dûm began with simple mine shafts and halls carved into the living rock. Each strike of dwarven picks revealed new veins of ore, each excavated chamber led to richer deposits. The initial tunnels expanded into galleries, the galleries grew into great halls. Natural caverns discovered during the digging were transformed into vast chambers whose ceilings disappeared into darkness. Throughout the First Age, while wars raged in the west and elven kingdoms rose and fell, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm delved ever deeper. Iron and gold flowed from their forges. Their smiths mastered the working of precious metals. Their stonemasons perfected the art of carving living rock. The halls grew more numerous, the workmanship more refined. Trade began with the outside world, carefully at first, then with growing confidence as the realm's wealth and reputation spread. The Second Age marked a critical turning point for Khazad-dûm. When the War of Wrath shattered the great dwarf cities of Nogrod and Belegost in the Blue Mountains, their survivors fled to the halls of Durin's folk. With them came jealously guarded secrets, the weaponsmiths of Nogrod with their matchless techniques of forging, the stonemasters of Belegost with their ancient knowledge of mansion building. In the deep halls of Khazad-dûm, the combined craft of three ancient houses shaped steel and stone into forms that would be remembered for ages to come. Over the centuries, the fame of their craftsmanship spread far beyond the mountains. Around the year 750 of the Second Age, the Noldorin elves established the realm of Eregion near Khazad-dûm's western borders, drawn by tales of dwarven artistry. This proximity led to an unprecedented alliance between the two peoples. It was during this period of collaboration that dwarven miners made their greatest discovery. Deep beneath the mountains, they found veins of mithril, a metal of unparalleled beauty and strength. Lighter than iron but harder than steel, untarnishable and incomparably lovely, mithril transformed Khazad-dûm from a mighty kingdom into the wealthiest realm in Middle-earth. Eregion was nigh to the great mansions of the dwarves that were named Khazad-dûm, but by the elves Hadhodrond, and afterwards Moria. From Ostin-Edil, the city of the elves, the high road ran to the west gate of Khazad-dûm, for a friendship arose between dwarves and elves, such as has never elsewhere been, to the enrichment of both those peoples. The friendship between Khazad-dûm and Eregion grew ever deeper, built on mutual respect and shared love of craft. Celebrimbor, lord of Eregion and greatest of the elven smiths, worked alongside the dwarven masters in their forges. Their greatest collaboration stood in the West Gate, known as the Doors of Durin. Crafted by the dwarf smith Navi and Celebrimbor himself, these doors bore inscriptions written in Itildin, visible only by starlight or moonlight, declaring their friendship in both Elvish and Dwarvish tongues. As trade and wealth flowed, the great halls took their next form. The east gate of Khazad-dûm, known as the Great Gates or Dimril Gate, opened toward the Dimril Dale, a valley shadowed by three mighty peaks: Barazinbar, the Red Horn, Ziraxigil, the Silvertine, and Bundushatur, the Cloudy Head. The steep valley before the gate descended in grand stone terraces, masterworks of dwarven stone-cutting that led down to Khazad-dûm, the Mirrormere, where Durin had first seen his crown of stars reflected. Engineering marvels marked every level of Khazad-dûm. New halls and chambers were delved at many levels, connected by broad streets and soaring arches. Ventilation shafts, carved through the rock with mathematical precision, ensured fresh air reached even the deepest inhabited chambers. Cleverly engineered systems of mirrors reflected sunlight from the high valleys down into the upper halls. Underground springs were channeled through the rock to provide fresh water at every level, while drainage systems more intricate than any in Middle-earth prevented flooding. The 21st Hall served as the great marketplace of Khazad-dûm, where dwarves gathered to trade and travelers from distant lands offered their goods. Its vast chamber echoed with the voices of merchants and the clinking of coins, while caravans unpacked their wares beneath its soaring ceiling. In the chamber of Mazabul, scribes recorded the kingdom's history in books bound with precious metals, their pages preserving the chronicles of Durin's folk for future generations. The bridge of Khazad-dûm demonstrated their mastery of defensive architecture, a single span of stone 50 feet in length, arching slightly at its center. No rail or guard protected its edges, forcing any who would cross to do so in single file. The bridge crossed a chasm of unfathomable depth, its bottom lost in darkness that no light had ever touched. This narrow crossing served as both passage and defense, its precise dimensions ensuring that no enemy force could rush across in numbers. At its peak, Khazad-dûm stretched through the heart of the mountains from the great gates in the east to the doors of Durin in the west. 7 levels of halls rose above the great gates, while uncounted depths plunged below into the mines. The population grew beyond any other dwarven realm in history, with some records suggesting as many as 200,000 dwarves lived and worked in its halls. The sound of hammers rang through its corridors day and night. The forges never cooled. The mines never ceased their production. Light and music filled chambers that had been dark since the mountain's making. Trade flowed through both gates of the kingdom. From the west came elvish cloth and wine, artifacts of power and songs of beauty. From the east came grain from the vales of Anduin and exotic goods from distant lands. Within the mountain, smiths worked at forges passed down through generations, each adding their own refinements to ancient techniques. Masons carved new halls with tools that had shaped the first chambers. The wealth of Khazad-dûm seemed as endless as its mines, its power as unshakable as the mountains themselves. For more than 3,000 years, through the Second Age and into the Third, Khazad-dûm maintained its power and prosperity. Yet subtle changes began to undermine its strength. The destruction of a region by Sauron in 1697 of the Second Age forced the dwarves to seal their western doors, severing ancient trade routes and friendships. As the Third Age progressed, fewer children were born in the deep halls, while more dwarves departed for newer kingdoms in the east. The great chambers that had once echoed with thousands of voices grew quieter. Many of the upper mining levels were exhausted of their most accessible wealth, driving the remaining miners ever deeper in search of mithril veins. Still, the forges burned and the hammers rang, though their numbers diminished year by year. Their numbers continued to dwindle, yet the wealth of mithril drove the remaining dwarves ever deeper beneath their halls. New mining techniques allowed them to follow the silvery veins into the mountain's deepest roots. The lowest mines descended through levels of darkness, each deeper than the last. Support pillars grew thicker, reinforced with steel and stone to hold the weight above. The air grew warmer, heavy with the mountain's heat. Yet still they dug. The first warnings came from the deepest mining crews. Tools disappeared from sealed chambers. Strange echoes carried through vacant tunnels. Miners reported feeling watched in the darkness beyond their lamps. Support beams were found splintered in abandoned shafts, though the stone above showed no signs of shifting. The mine overseers dismissed these as common fears of the deep places, yet ordered additional guards for the lower levels. In the year 1980 of the Third Age, a mining team broke through into a natural cavern far below the lowest worked mines. The chamber's size defied measurement. Their strongest lamps could not illuminate its furthest reaches. Ancient pillars of stone rose from depths unseen to heights unknowable. The air carried a heat unlike any they had encountered, dry and sulphurous. The mining captain ordered the chamber sealed, recognizing that they had delved too deep. The warning came too late. The first signs of real danger came within days. An entire mining crew vanished from a sealed shaft. Their tools were found scattered, their lamps smashed. The search parties found no bodies, only long scratches in the stone walls and scorch marks on the floor. More disappearances followed. Whole sections of the deep mines became abandoned as crews refused to descend. The lower halls grew quiet for the first time in centuries. The source of their doom revealed itself, where a team of guards encountered a creature of shadow and flame. Their descriptions, scratched hastily into the last pages of the guardroom log, spoke of a being that towered above them, wreathed in darkness and terrible heat. Only one guard survived to deliver the warning. The creature they had woken was a Balrog of Morgoth, a demon of the ancient world that had hidden in the deep places since the First Age. The Balrog's awakening spelled doom for Khazad-dûm. Fire spread through the lower mines. Entire chambers collapsed as support pillars crumbled in the intense heat. The deepest treasures of the Dwarven realm, including the richest mithril veins, were abandoned as the creature claimed the depths for its own. The Dwarves retreated upward level by level, sealing passages and reinforcing defenses as they went. But the demon of fire and shadow could not be contained. Word of the ancient horror reached King Durin VI in his upper halls. Mine captains brought reports of entire crews lost to flame and shadow. Guards described battles against a foe their weapons could not harm. The king dispatched scouts to assess the threat, but few returned. Those who did spoke of a creature from the elder days, a demon of fire that turned the very air to poison. Within days, the lower mines were completely abandoned, and the sound of drums echoed up from the deep places. King Durin VI led the defense of his realm. The Dwarven king marshaled his armies, preparing to meet this ancient evil with the full might of Khazad-dûm. Weapons were drawn from treasuries, armor was distributed, and plans were made to drive the creature back into the depths, if the creature couldn't be killed. The Balrog burst through the defensive lines like fire through dry timber. In the first moments of battle, a dozen of the king's best warriors vanished in sheets of flame. The demon's fire melted armor and weapons alike, its shadow extinguishing all light save its own flames. King Durin VI stood his ground before the monster, but even his legendary mithril armor blackened and melted under the demon's burning grasp. The Balrog crushed the king in its fiery claws and slammed him against the chamber walls, his broken body falling among his guards. The Dwarven armies scattered through the halls and passages. Across 7 levels of Khazad-dûm, warriors fell before this foe from the elder days, their bodies marking a trail of retreat from the deeps to the upper halls. Days passed before the full extent of the disaster reached the upper halls. There, in the relative safety above the 5th deep, Nain I received word of his father's death and the army's destruction. Survivors brought reports of the demon's inexorable advance through the lower levels, each account worse than the last. Nain I, son of Durin VI, inherited both crown and catastrophe. The new king ordered an immediate evacuation of the lower halls, while his remaining warriors would hold defensive positions at each level to cover the retreat. Dwarven engineers collapsed passages and sealed gates, hoping to contain the ancient evil. The great forges were extinguished. The deep treasuries were abandoned. The mines that had brought such wealth fell silent. Many dwarves resisted abandoning their ancestral halls. Master craftsmen barricaded their forges, vowing to protect generations of secrets. Noble families refused to leave their treasured chambers. Yet Nain I ordered his guards to evacuate them by force if necessary, while engineers worked to fortify the upper levels. For months, Nay walked the upper halls of his fathers, touching the ancient stones his ancestors had carved, watching the light play on mithril veins that had brought such glory to their people. Each day he received reports of the demon's advance. Each night he remembered his father's final stand. The throne of Khazad-dûm had come to him soaked in his father's blood. He would not surrender it without one last attempt at vengeance. In 1981 of the Third Age, barely a year after his father's death, he gathered his remaining warriors for one final attempt to reclaim the lower halls. Like his father before him, he led from the front, believing that superior numbers and prepared positions might overcome the demon's power. In the second hall, Nay met the same fate as Durin's sixth, his weapons useless, his armor melting, his courage insufficient against a foe from the elder days. The survivors who witnessed the king's death spread word through the upper halls. Their mightiest warriors had fallen, their greatest weapons had failed. 2 kings had perished before this unstoppable foe. His death broke the last resistance of Durin's folk. The remaining dwarves fled through the great gates into exile, leaving behind their ancient home forever. The bridge of Khazad-dûm became their final escape route. The fall of Khazad-dûm sent shockwaves through Middle-earth. The proud dwarven kingdom had been reduced to haunted ruins in mere decades. Its people scattered to the northern lands, carrying only fragments of their former wealth. The name Khazad-dûm fell out of use, replaced by a new title, Moria, the Black Pit. The loss transformed dwarven society. Never again would they delve so deep or build on such a grand scale. In the vacuum left by the dwarves' departure, darker things crept in. The Balrog's presence drew creatures of shadow and malice. Orcs began filtering through cracks and forgotten tunnels, claiming the abandoned halls for their own. The great chambers that had once echoed with craftwork and song now rang with the harsh cries of goblins. The darkness that gathered in Moria acted like a beacon to evil things, until the ancient kingdom became a festering pit of corruption at the heart of the Misty Mountains. Attempts to reclaim Moria began within a generation. Small expeditions probed the eastern gates, testing the defenses of the orcs who now infested the upper halls. Each attempt ended in failure. The Balrog remained in the deep places, a guardian that made any thought of permanent reoccupation impossible. The orcs grew numerous in the darkness, breeding in the chambers where dwarven children had once played. Moria, Moria, wonder of the northern world. Too deep we delved there, and woke the nameless fear. Long have its vast mansions lain empty since the chill dren of Durin fled. But now we spoke of it again with longing, and yet with dread, for no dwarf has dared to pass the doors of Khazad-dûm. The most significant attempt at reclamation came in the year 2989 of the Third Age. Bane, a hero of Erebor, led a strong force of dwarves into Moria through the East Gate. Initial success allowed them to establish a foothold. They drove back the orcs, secured the chamber of Mazabul, and began to rebuild. For 5 years it seemed they might succeed where others had failed. The colony's end came swiftly. Orc attacks increased, supported by darker things from the deep places. The dwarves found themselves surrounded, cut off from escape. The chamber of Mazabul became their last redoubt. The Book of Mazabul, rescued centuries later, recorded their final days. Balin fell to an orc arrow while looking into Miramir. The rest died defending the chamber, their bodies buried beneath a cairn of fallen stone. The wealth of ages remained locked in darkness, untouchable behind the doors of Durin. Ancient pieces of mithril, like Bilbo's coat of mail, became priceless treasures that could have bought the entire Shire. The secret of working mithril remained with the dwarven smiths, but without new sources of the metal, they would only maintain existing pieces. Through the Third Age, new kingdoms like Erebor and the Iron Hills grew strong and wealthy, but none attempted to build on the same scale as their ancient capital. The dwarves became more cautious in their mining, more defensive in their architecture. Their newer halls stayed closer to the surface, with multiple escape routes built into their design. By the closing years of the Third Age, Khazad-dûm's fate had entered the mythology of Middle-earth. For elves, it served as a warning against delving too deep into the mysteries of the world. For men, it became a cautionary tale about the price of unchecked ambition. Even the hobbits of the Shire included fragments of its story in their fireside tales, though they knew it only as a distant place of danger and darkness.